We love to really get into a good book here. And, since you're a Tintin in Tibet fan.
Oh, yeah.
We thought we'd take a deep dive with you into this one. Because it's more than just a great adventure story, right?
Right. It really is. It makes you think about, humanity, what it means. And philosopher Michel Serres, he really digs into this in his analysis of the book.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so we'll be following his lead today.
Yeah.
And you know what I find fascinating?
What's that?
Serres was so into this story that he actually went on his own Himalayan trek.
Wow.
That's dedication to your work right there.
It says something about the power of this book.
It really does.
That it can, inspire that kind of a journey, both literally and intellectually.
Absolutely. So what's the first, big idea that Serres kind of throws at us with this?
Well, he proposes that Tintin actually goes on not one, but 3 different journeys in this book.
3 journeys.
3 journeys.
Okay, break that down for me a little bit.
Okay.
For our listener, too, obviously.
So the first journey is the obvious one, the adventure, right?
Right.
He's going to find his friend Chang, and he's, going through all these obstacles.
Classic Tintin.
Classic Tintin obstacles. But the second journey, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, all right, now you've got me. What's the second journey?
Well, think about the moment when the Sherpas are like, okay, we're turning back.
Yeah.
This is too much.
They're like, we're out of here.
Right? And it's like this turning point.
It is. And you feel it in the story at that point, too, when it's just him and Haddock and that landscape.
It becomes this huge...
It's a turning point.
It's like a psychological barrier as well as a physical one.
Yeah.
So the Himalayas become more than just a physical challenge.
Right.
They represent this test of Tintin's character.
Okay.
And this is where that second, more internal journey begins, where he's really having to face his own, strength and resilience.
So that leads us into the third journey.
Exactly. And this third journey, this is the big one. This is this spiritual transformative journey that leads him to the encounter with the Yetis.
Interesting how he frames it like that there are these 3 journeys.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Yeti, I know he has some opinions about what, or should I say who, is truly abominable in the story.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, he kind of flips the question on us, right? He asks us to consider, is it really the Yeti that's abominable? Or is it actually human behavior?
Oh.
And he even draws a parallel to the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Interesting. Okay, the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
I'm curious now.
Yeah, it's like, we often focus on the surface level of these stories, right? So there's an act of kindness.
Yeah.
We need to help those in need, and that's great. But he's saying the real revelation is how we treat those who we label as abominable.
Okay.
Like the Yeti. But then he says, even the Samaritan.
How is the Samaritan? I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Mm-hmm.
How is the Samaritan?
That's what's so brilliant about it. It challenges our assumptions, right?
Right.
We judge based on appearances or, on differences.
Yeah.
But both the Yeti and the Samaritan, they demonstrate this really profound, selfless compassion.
So you're saying that the real monsters are the ones who can't see past those outward differences, essentially.
Yes, and that empathy and that compassion.
Right.
Which is
that powerful.
a theme that feels, I think, even more relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Than it did when the book came out.
Yeah. And it makes me think, too, because you had mentioned, and I totally forgot about this detail from the book, but the Yeti cries at the end.
Yeah.
I mean,
such a powerful moment.
It is. And I had totally, when you said that, I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. And Serres points to that and says that, those who would judge him as this inhuman monster are really the ones who are miserable.
And that word miserable has it's a heavy word to use.
Well, it's not just that they're, feeling a little down. It's deeper than that. It's this lack of empathy, this inability to see the other.
Yeah. It reminds me of, Diogenes going around with his lamp in the daylight, looking for an honest man.
Exactly.
And it's almost like, is Sarah saying that maybe we need to be looking in those unexpected places for true humanity?
I think that's what makes this so fascinating, because we're not just talking about a Yeti, right?
Right.
A fictional creature. We're talking about us.
Yeah.
And how we see the world.
And what it means to be human.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, go on your own search for an honest man, but instead of an honest man, it's where do we find that true humanity?
Yeah. And we don't all have the luxury, right, of just hopping on a plane and trekking through the Himalayas.
Right.
So where were we supposed to be looking? According to Serres, where did we find this?
Well, he says you don't need to go to the Himalayas to find it.
Okay.
You don't have to seek out the Yeti. Right.
He says that it's right here. in our own communities. It's those everyday encounters, where we find both the, quote unquote, abominable and the truly good.
He's holding up a mirror to us and how we act.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then he connects this idea to modern humanitarian efforts.
Okay.
He's saying that, people like those with Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah.
Were going into these really intense situations.
Putting themselves on the line.
And they're facing oftentimes, people who are very different from them.
And they're encountering resistance and misunderstandings probably.
Exactly, yeah. And so there's this parallel there, right? Where they're facing almost like this,
It's like they become the Yeti in a way.
In a way, yeah.
And it's like that whole idea that sometimes it's the people who we think of as the most civilized.
Right.
Who are capable
the
of...
most monstrous acts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of a sobering thought.
It is. But he doesn't leave us there, thankfully.
Okay, good.
He does offer a glimmer of hope.
Okay, tell me about that, because I like a hopeful ending.
Yeah, well, he basically says that if we can grasp this idea, we can wrap our heads around it and really see that inherent goodness, even in those unexpected places, that the world would be a much better place.
Right.
A world where we...
It's that utopia that we're all hoping for, right? But is it attainable?
Right.
Because it's like you turn on the news and it's easy to just feel like, what's the point?
Hopeless. Yeah. And that it's too big. What can I do?
Yeah, exactly. So what's the takeaway? What are we supposed to do?
Well, he doesn't pretend to have the answer.
Right.
Right. He's not going to give us a 5-step plan.
Right.
But he's asking us to be more aware.
Okay.
To really see the world around us and to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
But look past those easy answers.
Yeah. And to choose compassion.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah. Because it's easy to love.
Right.
The people that are easy to love.
Exactly. But to see that spark of, shared humanity.
Yeah.
Even in the toughest encounters, that's the challenge. And I think that's what he leaves us with.
Yeah. And that's really what it all comes down to. That's what connects us.
Yeah.
And I like what you said earlier, too, about, he kind of takes it a step further and says that our modern world is making that harder.
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
It's interesting.
He was saying our modern world might be making it harder to see that humanity in each other.
Yeah, it's like we're surrounded by information, by stories, right? But he's saying that might actually make it harder to really connect with that human element.
It's weird to think about, right? Mm-hmm. We're more connected than ever.
Right.
But are we really connected?
Exactly. Yeah. And he uses this word desensitized, which I think is really powerful because it's like, you can draw that parallel back to the book, to those characters judging the Yeti.
Yeah.
So quick to label him as this monster. And it's like, are we doing the same thing just on a broader scale now?
Yeah. And I think about that even just with the news, right? It's like we see these huge global problems.
Right.
And it's easy to feel
overwhelmed.
Yeah. Overwhelmed. And well, little old me, what can I do about any of this?
Exactly. Yeah.
So how do we fight that then? Because I imagine our listeners probably feeling that a little bit right now.
Well, and that's the question, right? What do we do? Yeah. And, Serres, he doesn't have a simple answer, but he reminds us that we have a choice. Yeah. We can choose to engage with the world with our eyes open, to fight that urge, to kind of just throw our hands up.
Right, to become apathetic.
Yeah.
Checked out.
Exactly. And to remember that even though it seems small, one act of kindness might not change the world.
Right.
But it can change the world for that one person.
Right. It's that ripple effect, right?
Yes, exactly.
You throw a pebble in the water.
And it spreads.
It keeps going.
Yeah. And you might not see how far it goes.
Right.
But it has an impact.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on Tintin in Tibet and what it means to be human.
Right.
What's the final thought you would leave with our listener?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about with those unexpected places, right?
Okay.
Because it's not always going to be some grand gesture.
Right.
It might be in the person we're, tempted to judge, or just that small act of kindness that we do for someone.
Yeah, those little moments.
Yeah, those little moments.
It's sometimes we don't even think about.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what makes us human.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this journey.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
It's been fascinating.
It's not every day you get to explore the Himalayas of the human heart, right?
That's a good way to put it. I like that. And to our listener, we hope that this deep dive has given you a few things to think about.
Yeah.
And maybe inspired you to look for those little acts of humanity around you.
Yeah.
And within yourself as well.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep exploring.